Hi. Thank the both of you. I thank the both of you for being here today. This means a lot to me. I'm so excited. This is my second video project. I did my first one last week, and it was it was a huge success. I'm very happy with the results of it. I'm just in the editing process of that now. But today we're going to be talking about the socioeconomic oppression of racial minorities in America. And basically the reason, I wanted to start with allowing the both of you to introduce yourselves to our viewers and just give a brief background of your educational history and your area of expertise. Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Shawn Reese Campbell. I actually have a PhD in American literature. I specialize in African American literature. I also recently obtained an MBA. So I've had that for 3 years. So I've got this kind of split thing going on between the humanities and the business world. I specialize in African American lit and culture, do some diaspora studies on continental Africa and the Caribbean, and gender studies, of course. I also do cultural heritage, and I found a way to pull all those loves together in ethnomedical criticism. I've actually developed a theoretical framework and coined that term of ethnomedical criticism. So those are where my interests are lying these days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dr. Shankar Brown.
Yes, hi, I'm Rajni Shankar Brown. I teach in the Department of Education, and I am an associate professor. I'm also the director of our graduate education programs, and then also I am the Jessie Ball DuPont Chair of Social Justice Education, which is definitely an honor I don't take lightly because this is my passion, right, my life's work. And so for me, my doctorate was in curriculum and instruction with specializations in urban education and in literacy education, really merging those two. And then my scholarship and scholarly work really focuses on addressing and improving the educational system and social and academic experiences for children and youth who are marginalized. So historically and socially marginalized, especially children and youth who are in poverty and experiencing homelessness. So that is really, it's not a job for me, it's what I do every day, and it's my life's work and passion. So I'm happy to be here today and share. So
Thank you so much to both of you. That was amazing. I learned some things about you that I didn't know. So I think that today's topic is very relevant because a lot of times people would say, especially in America, that racism no longer exists. But I don't believe that. I think that the cause of people saying that is the fact that the face of racism has changed. For example, maybe 30, 40 years ago, racism would be more blatant in the sense that it would be in your face. Like you could walk down the street, me or you, or even you especially, would hear people give blatantly racist comments, or there was even a time, of course, slavery, when we were hanged, and things that we can easily and readily identify as racism because they are in our faces, But I think that today, although it's no longer permissible to do these things publicly, I think that racism has transferred over into our systems, our organizations, and the way that we run our government, and that has created a type of systematic oppression, especially for minority groups in America. And that's what I wanted to discuss today. I wanted to talk specifically about institutionalized racism. I think that the aim of the lecture for me is to emphasize the particular ways that this happens in order to bring awareness. And that's the reason why I chose the both of you specifically, because I think that each of you would have a very unique perspective to bring, and I think that your areas, your educational backgrounds fit perfectly into today's discussion. And I specifically wanted to get your different perspectives racially, because Dr. Sean Reese Campbell, you're African American, and you, Dr. Shankar Brown, you come from an Indian background. And I wanted to know how these two racial minority experiences affect and influence your lives personally. But the first question I want to ask is pretty much a simple question. What is institutionalized racism or systematic oppression? And I wanted to ask this question because to us, it's a simple term, something that we can readily identify, but for a lot of the viewers, my audience is targeted to the general public who may not be as familiarized with these terms as we are. So I wanted to get down to the basics, to the nitty gritty, and then build on the complexity of the conversation as we progress. So did either one of you want to?
Okay.
So
okay. So yes, institutional racism is that kind of hidden racism. As you said, it's generally not blatant, but you see it in the outcomes. So when you have a disproportionate number of students, say, not graduating from an institution, whether it be a high school or a college, or a disproportionate number of workers never being promoted or obtaining tenure and promotion, regardless of how fair the system seems, there's something wrong. There is definitely something going on there that is impacting their ability to succeed. And so then you have what's called a disparate impact analysis, where you gather quantitative data to see what are the percentages, of folks that this is happening to. And once it hits a certain percent based on folks who are not part of that representative group who are succeeding, then you have quantitative evidence for, okay, there's definitely, statistically, there's something going on here. And I think a lot of times the reasons people don't want to acknowledge it is because the surface of everything can seem beautiful, like a lipstick and rouge, it enhances it. We've got all this great beauty around us, this diverse set of people, visible and indivisible types of diversity, and so it's all great. And you're like, no, because what is their personal experience in that culture? Are they succeeding in obtaining their goals in your culture? And if they're not, why? And if it is at a, again, statistically significant rate, and even a lot of times when it's not, but generally the statistics will support it too, there's something going on in your culture that is impeding their success and progress. And that's an indication of institutional racism.
Yeah, and I would just add, it was beautifully said, but I would just add that you only need to look at, our incarceration, our prison system, our schools, what's happening in our schools, you can't deny that there is systemic oppression and active racism in our country, which is really unfortunate. I know a lot of people would like to think that we're in a post-racial society. President Obama, has taken office, and while I don't want to minimize progress that we've made historically speaking, the reality is, just in looking at statistics, but also hearing the voices of lives that are affected every day, the reality is we have a very long way to go. And that systemic oppression is very, very active. And you see that again, just going back even into our schools, disproportionately, our Black students and students who are brown are, suspended, expelled, have lower, graduation rates. So all of these kinds of, there's barriers that they're facing every day, right? Just because they're not part of privileged groups, right? And so part of systemic oppression, I would say, is not only looking at the idea of those who are oppressed, but also those who are privileged, right? And how does that interact? You have to have both. And you have to be able to acknowledge both, I think, to be able to combat this. So it's definitely there, and same thing with our prison system. I mean, you only need to look at now, the criminalization of our youth, who are, again, already marginalized in so many ways. to see systemic oppression. So.
And on this topic, something that that is relevant to this that I would like to bring up is the culture of poverty notion. It's that, to my knowledge, is that the notion that is usually imposed on the oppressed groups by the oppressive group is that it's the fault of the oppressed group that they are oppressed, specifically economically and socially. That, for example, African Americans, that the things that cause us to be in poverty are our faults. I think that maybe someone that was ignorant to the situation would say, looking to the inside from the outside, would say, for example, that, well, it's not our fault. Well, it's not our fault that black people are oppressed and they live in ghettos, typically by large numbers, because they're the ones that are getting themselves incarcerated. They're the ones that are not fighting for better jobs. When we really look at the bigger picture, like we've said already, it's because of the institutionalization and the policies that are put in place that are inhibiting the progress of minorities in America. And I think that, like I said before, about the face of racism, it not being as prevalent, people think that because there's no one in my face pointing at me saying you N-word, or saying, or calling me less than life, or actively, in person stopping me from achieving my goals, that I am not a product of, or I'm not subject to an oppressive system. Like I'm not being oppressed anymore because I have equal rights. But the next thing I wanted to ask, could either of you give specific examples of institutionalized racism? There was something actually that I took a class of yours, Dr. Campbell, and one thing that I learned about was redlining. And that's something that I find very interesting, and if you wouldn't mind, I would love to.
Well, redlining, as you know, is when you steer particularly people of color away from certain properties because you don't want that neighborhood integrated. And this is done by real estate agents. And also, it affects the value of the property that people will buy. So generally what tends to happen is once your neighborhood is 10% or more multicultural, especially as far as visual racial markers go, housing values start to decrease in that neighborhood. It is no longer a desirable demographic to live in, quote unquote. And so you actively, if you're looking for a house, you will have real estate agents who actively do not show you houses in certain neighborhoods because they don't want the value of those properties in that neighborhood to go down, and because they know that the folks that they've sold to in that neighborhood do not want you there. Now, it's totally illegal. You're not allowed to do that, but it is very much an active practice. And you can look at that just by observing housing values, even different parts of the land. Similarly built house, one may be in Spring Hill, another on the west side of the land, same square area, same footage, and the one on the west side of the land further up from Spring Hill is going to be worth $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more than the exact same house, because the house is in Spring Hill, which is a predominantly black area in DeLand. So this is all over. And that's redlining.
I love the way that this conversation is going. I think that it's been very productive, and I think that for people that will view this, that it can be very, very helpful. The next question I wanted to ask is, have either of you experienced firsthand racism on economic or classist grounds? And then, well, both firsthand, being more direct, and also, have you ever found yourself to be subject to the actual system, where it may not be someone, you know, directly oppressing you, but you find that because of your ethnicity that you're in a position where it's difficult for you to advance, whether it be with housing, whether it be in your profession, with jobs, whether it be, you know, in education, in your schooling. And I wanted to, and the reason why I asked this question, if you all are comfortable with answering it, because I wanted to know how the experience varies amongst different minority groups, because I know first off that neither of you are the spokesperson for the entire for the entire ethnic group that you come from, but I know that each of you have had experiences that or could be representative to some extent of other people in your ethnic groups.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to articulate at the moment, because when you ask that question, there's so many, unfortunately, examples that come to mind, right? And I feel like, I feel like on some level, like it's a daily kind of occurrence when I really think about it, of how I'm facing or how I'm perceived, right, in ways. So even just thinking about it professionally, I know throughout my career, you know, it's been difficult, because a lot of times I'm perceived to be incompetent in ways, or I'm having to prove myself or do double, triple what maybe my peers that are part of dominant groups have to do to kind of prove myself, right? And it's exhausting, you know, it really gets exhausting. And, you know, and economically that's hard too. I know that, you know, there's been times in my life professionally where I have, you know, definitely met all of the criteria for a promotion, for example. And, you know, it's not even microaggressions, really macroaggressions, where, you know, people have come out and said to me, you know, based on my religion, based on my, you know, not being part of a dominant religion, not being, you know, part of a kind of a dominant group as a whole, you know, that's not going to work, you know, or, you know, just kinds of comments like that, which we know are illegal, but they happen, right? They happen every day, and sometimes they happen in kind of under, you know, ways, subtle kinds of ways, and it's very, very, it's painful and it's exhausting, but it's also, I think, a lot of what motivates my work now, right? The reason why I am so passionate about social justice and why I'm working with our students on campus actively to kind of raise consciousness and say we need more allies in this fight. So that's been hard. I mean, you know, even in school, I know, you know, just having numerous experiences where I felt like I was not heard, I was not valued through the curriculum. You know, so it's from childhood, right? But now as an adult, it's even harder, because it is in material ways. You brought up the idea of economic realities, and you know, it's very real, and I've seen it, and it's not just for myself, right? My brothers and sisters who are also part of marginalized groups in various ways, I've seen how their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their language, their sexuality, these types of their identities, because they were not part of privileged groups, has unfairly, you know, hurt them in ways, unfairly kept them from, you know, job promotions or even getting a job, unfairly kept them from qualifying for housing loans, you know, unfairly, you know, kept them from just even everyday experiences, right, in life situations. So even in DeLand, it's been really, really hard for me. I don't want to get emotional. I'm sorry, Abby. I'm so sorry. It's been hard. You know, I have 2 children. And so my son is 11, my daughter's 4. And, you know, in the time we've been here, we've had numerous experiences that have been really painful, right? In our community, you know, and this is our community, you know, we're part of it just like everybody else. And so, you know, just, you know, I took them to a pizza place once, and it's a family pizza joint, and what's ironic about it is I was like the biggest supporter of this pizza place, telling everybody like, oh yeah, let's not buy the chain, support the family-owned, pizza joint on the corner of our street. And when we were there, one of the customers was standing in line and said, you shouldn't even be here. This is, a Christian-owned family joint. Why are you here? And started to attack me. And I was wearing Indian garb that day, and and just started to attack me. And the place was packed, and not one person stood up. Right? Not one person. My son just started to cry, ran out. Right? And and the workers who were there, I knew them well. I got pizza from here often, right? I brought people there, and so for them not to stand up either, right? And so that's painful, and it's exhausting to be met with such unkindness and hate when, it's unwarranted, right? And so now, to see my children having to see this and battle this and ask questions, it's hard. It's hard, right? And I know one of my very first incidents in the community, try not to mess up my makeup, I had taken the kids, it happened that it was on 9/11, and so I had taken the children we have a frozen yogurt place just right there in downtown DeLand, and they love frozen yogurt, so I took them after school, and again, we were there, and there was a woman in front of us who turned around and just grabbed her husband's hand. They shouldn't let terrorists in our country. This is ridiculous. And made these kinds of comments where all of a sudden, it honestly, it took me, I couldn't even process it because I was like, is she talking about me? Like, I'm not a terrorist, right? And I was, so it's just how people can perceive you, and you have to, when that's kind of attacked at you, it's really hard. And so my son right away, started to cry again, pulled me out, and he said, why would she even say something like that, Mom? This is crazy. And then he was starting to talk about how India isn't even close to, and I said, but that's irrelevant, right? Even if we were Islam or Muslim, that has nothing to do with this. And so I had to have those conversations with my kids, and, and I hate that. And now, my son, he can't enjoy frozen yogurt anymore, right? That makes me sad, right? But it brings back this memory now of what happened. And my daughter's younger, so she's 4, so she's not really, completely aware all the time, right? These children are so innocent in that sense of, but she's already, even though she's starting to become a little more aware, right? Because of things people have said. There was a young child in her class who they wouldn't let her have a play date because I was in a biracial relationship, because my husband is white, right? And I'm Indian, and, I don't even think, I think, really? Like, 2015, but it's still real in ways, where, and I think that, sometimes people don't want to have these conversations because they're hard to have or painful to have, but I think it's so important that we do have these conversations. So that's one reason I thank you for inviting us and having conversations to really raise the awareness, in the public and bring this dialogue to the forefront, because it's so needed. Yeah.
Wow. Something that a part of your story reminded me of something that we were talking about in my feminist philosophy class that I'm taking with Dr. Pepper Spades. Yeah. And it was that members of oppressed minority groups, they are always grouped together, So if there's a stereotype about that group, every member of that group, regardless of their individual actions, are subject to that stereotype. Yeah. But members of the privileged white group are always seen as individuals. Yes. And are not judged on the basis of their ethnic background. Yeah. But once you have any minority group which the dominant group has oppressed and put that stereotype on that group, they're always grouped, and they're just like your experience. Why I don't know why they would allow terrorists in our country. that woman, she knows in reality that you're not a terrorist, but it's that background of privilege that gives people the idea that it's okay to say things like that. And I'm so sorry for that experience that you had.
Thank you. Yeah.
And the lack of people not
Standing,
responding.
and I think that hurt me more.
You know,
right?
I mean, like, I'm just
It's-
like
yeah.
outraged. You know, she
Yeah.
knew, she could say it, and she said it in public
Right.
because she knew
That
she
she's
had
gonna
the
be backed
support.
by her people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that more than likely there would be no one who would get in her face and confront her about
Right.
that. You know?
Right.
And that to me speaks volumes, you know. I'm sure folks in the restaurant will want to say, oh, well, that's just her.
Right.
No, that's you too. You're
Right.
complicit in this too because you supported her.
Right.
When you didn't confront
Yeah.
her.
When we're
you know,
silent.
about her
Silent,
sincerity.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know? And so, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know? My experiences are different, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly
Yeah.
as a Black American,
Yeah.
U.S. Black American woman, sit here to
Yeah.
listen to you. They're different. I had not experienced as much, and it's. I mean, I'm feeling hard put to come up with blatant kind of in your face stereotype racism, but definitely passive aggressive
Oh yeah.
by stealth, you know, which is this feeling that you think everything is going okay and that sort of thing, and you're betrayed. And it makes it hard to trust anyone after those types of experiences. So mine has never been as blatant. I think maybe too because for whatever reason, I've always been a groundbreaker in different sense. You know? Like, I was the first one at my high school at the time to go to prom with my boyfriend, who was white at the time,
Okay.
and it had never been done before in our school's history, you know.
Yeah.
And so we were deemed like, you know, the Jackie Robinson of the time, right? You know? And we didn't think about it, but.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even at that time
Right.
when we did it. It was afterwards. And it was afterwards when the Black community was talking about, oh, do you
Right.
remember when they went to prom? And how they were really proud. They were like, you know, there were lots of people who sneaked, you know, who hid and that sort of thing. But you two, you actually went. And how groundbreaking that was for our little town.
Right.
For that to happen. And I was just, but I've always found myself in that position where you're breaking new ground,
Right.
and it's hard.
Right.
I mean, it's you're going in, and it's like you're setting, leveling, trying to level out the road for the folks to come. And I'm like, why am I called to this path? This seems to be my path in life in doing this, and it's often always isolating because you find yourself the only one.
Right.
Right. So I'm the only Black faculty member in English. In the humanities, I
Right.
think in the humanities, and I've been here almost 14 years now. Right. In what I do, there's not another Africanist on this campus.
Right.
You know? And so being the only one, the criteria that's used to judge you is what's already in place. And it's not even applicable to you.
Right.
Right? And so then you're going in and trying to get people to practice what they preach.
Yeah.
If you say you're not racist and you don't have these stereotypes that you're living by and that sort of thing, show me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So mine's has always been the one to push the envelope and say, okay, I'm going to call you on that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And it has its own
Right.
cuts and bruises that come with
Well,
it.
that's,
You know?
I was just about to say, just, you know, and when you do that, it's always such a risk because you're already, you know, the passive, it's there. And then when you speak out, you know, sometimes you can be punished even more, right? The consequences are, you know, which I'm glad you're still doing.
And that's what I don't keep my mouth shut, you know, which is a blessing, and sometimes I wonder maybe. But no, you know, I mean, but that just, it's not something that I've ever sought,
Yeah.
but it's
I'm not going to be quiet, you know. So lucky for the other folks that I wasn't there, because no, that's like not going to happen. And I've been that way since grade school. I cannot stand to see someone unjustly treated. I was always the one who would speak out for the quote unquote nerd groups or various. I'm like, don't, don't do that. I don't call them that. That's like, if you're going to be with, that's not cool. Not in my circle. That's not happening. And you might be off with your friends over here, but not with me. And I've always been like that. Just something inside me is just like, show love to everyone. So,
but I think it's interesting because, we have these intersectionalities of our identities as well that play a part. So, even, I have found, so when I do speak out, sometimes, I feel like I am judged in a whole different way that doesn't even have to do with my race, but because of gender, right? So then it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're an outspoken woman, or you're bitchy, or there's all these kinds of other words that are used, and so it's hard. This is complex because of all these kinds of, if you're part of different marginalized groups in a way, you have forces kind of against you, in different ways that you're having to kind of deal with, and
and you'll never. Not that I need the label, but it's isolating. You'll never be the ideal colleague, right? Which then can affect you economically, because if you don't get promotion, or you don't get tenure, or you're being evaluated lower, so your raises are not as high, all of that impacts.
The material.
My material life, right? Because I'm never going to be the ideal colleague. I'm not, but you hired me because I was different.
Right.
You wanted me to bring difference to the table. And my difference has a different aesthetic, and it has different standards. They're comparable, but they're different.
Right.
Then you punish me for that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a dilemma all around our nation, especially now because we have this kind of, again, it goes back to language is so interesting, but we have this narrative of, diversity, we're going to embrace diversity, we want to, diversify but then once you're there, right, it's like, it's not really welcome. It's welcome if we need a photo. Contradiction that's very, very real.
Yes. It's like that meme going around Facebook now that I don't know what that university was thinking. If you want to get back to the winning ways of success, right? And it has the two apparently white Europeans crossing the finish line, two white males crossing the finish line first, and then a white female back, and then a black guy way back.
Have you seen that?
Have you not seen it? Let's get back to winning ways of success, or something like that is what the cover is.
It's got like a white male right in the front.
The two white males are crossing the finish line, and I was like, really? But that's what's truly operating, even when we have that beautiful rainbow of diversity that's happening. It's being done covertly in all the ways that we're talking about, and now even in not so covert ways, with the passage of the law recently. In what state was that, where you can discriminate based on religion? And so we've had this first story of a restaurant owner who refused to serve blacks in his restaurant based on religion. So this whole thing of going backwards, it's a scary time.
I can't believe this is really happening Wow. So what you were saying about being a groundbreaker, that really resonated with me, because I have gone through the same experience, and I think that for me, I've experienced many prejudices being a black person, but I think that the oppression that I've faced and the prejudice that I've experienced has been compounded exponentially because of my intersectional identity of being black and gay. And I think that in every environment that I go to, it's like I'm almost always a groundbreaker, because I mean, there are other gay people that are in different environments that I go in and I succeed in, but never another black gay person. So even within the gay community, if you're white, you still have an extent of privilege. And unfortunately, there's a terrible stigma within the black community that being gay or being other is deeply frowned upon. And I think that within the black community, there's a kind of, unfortunately, there's a kind of sheep or herd mentality where you're strongly encouraged to just not make waves, to fit in, and to just go with the flow. And I've never been that kind of person. And so it has brought many, it brought me a lot of sadness over the course of my life, but I think that you're not defined by the experiences that you face, but how you respond to those experiences. And for that I'm grateful, because I've taken all of those experiences and I've turned them into things like this. And I'm very excited for my future and for my career, because I believe that even with this, I'll be a groundbreaker. And I want to be able to I think that having so many different intersectionalities to my identity can work to my advantage, because it allows me to address such a multitude of different problems in our society. I'm black, I'm gay, I'm not cisgendered, which means that I don't identify with the sex that I was assigned at birth. I consider myself to be androgynous internally, meaning that I identify as both male and female, and that's a whole other stigma that people place on me, because I mean, it shows in the way that I dress, in the way that I walk and talk, the way that I present myself socially. And so I'm kind of I think in that sense, on that dimension, I have been treated, I've experienced in many ways the type of oppression that women face. And also, there's an entirely different type of oppression that I face when people learn that I am not of the dominant Christian religion. And so those are a lot of things that are supposed to work against me, but I believe will work for my good in the end. So I thank you for that comment. That was very, very inspirational to me. And so to wrap this up, the last question that I have is, how do you all propose that, what are some ways that we can work through this problem? If a such thing as racism is ever to end, how could it be achieved?
Well, it has to start with a recognition of the cultural records, like the way that we are taught to perpetuate the way we think about others through stereotypical lenses first. And a lot of times without checking ourselves. You know, we have the thought and we just act with that thought, we never pause. But if you are trained to stop and think like, oh my gosh, that thought just popped into my head. Okay, do I choose to act with it or do I not choose to act with it? That it's possible. And having just come back from Belize just a couple of weeks ago, which is awesome. Oh my gosh.
Reese with the hand in.
Yes. Awesome Belize. And seeing, now it's not that Belize doesn't have issues with prejudice and that sort of, but they do not operate under those cultural stereotypes that we immediately do. So people, because you got Mestizo, you got Carib, you got Garifuna, you got Maya, you got white, and folks are not moving across to the other side of the road when somebody's coming down the street when it's dark and that sort of thing. Everyone is saying how they're not immediately responding to a person that they do not know with a culturally implanted stereotype, because the records are not playing. And even as much as American culture has influenced them in their style of dress and their music, I mean, like Maya's with do-rags on and busting a sag, who would have thought? I'm
has not infiltrated their culture.
Right.
And it is the most glorious and beautiful experience
Yeah.
to be in an atmosphere like that.
Yeah.
So it's possible. Because if you believe it and then you go see it where it's operating, you know, and I'm like, okay, so the key is elimination of these cultural records, but they are so pervasive everywhere. And the other thing I would say is you have got to have, I think, an immersed experience, not only a friendship, collegial friendship with people, but I believe in being in people's lives.
Yeah.
You know, go on a vacation together, take a trip with your kids, submerge yourself in their culture and understanding their culture. Don't just be theoretical about it, you know, because theories are one thing, but the practice and lived experience, and when you live that hurt with them, you know, that changes you. And you're not going to get that out of a book. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say, you know, I was thinking about when you made the comment too about, you know, within the Black community, how you felt, you know, just isolated in different ways as well. And it's interesting because a lot of times I think one way systemic oppression, kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, works is it also takes those who are in marginalized groups and has them turning on each other, right? We see that all the time with
Internalized oppression.
Internalized oppression, yeah. So women, you know, hurting each other, but, you know, professionally because they know that they're already hurt, so now we're competing against each other for, you know. And so I think, you know, we need to all be more aware of that and make sure that we are being allies, that we are listening to each other and hearing each other and supporting each other and actively, you know, working to fight oppression at macro levels, right? And doing things like looking at federal policy and voting and, you know, but also on the micro level, right? On micro day-to-day lives, standing up for people, for injustice when we see it, right?